When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she set about destroying the entire royal family. But Jehoshaphat, the son of the king of Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the princes who were being slaughtered. She took him and his nurse, sequestered them in a bedroom, and hid them from Athaliah, so that he was not killed. He remained hidden with his nurse in the house of Adonai for 6 years. During this time, Athaliah ruled the land. In the 7th year, Jehoiada summoned the captains of 100-man platoons of both the Kiri and the guard. He brought them into the house of Adonai, made an agreement with them, and had them swear to it in the house of Adonai. Then he showed them the king's sons and gave them this instruction. Here is what you are to do. Of you who come on duty on Shabbat, a third normally guard the royal palace. A third is at the Shur gate, and a third is at the gate behind the guards. The first third is to continue guarding the palace and serve as a barrier, while the other 2 groups of you who come on duty on Shabbat will guard the house of Adonai where the king is. You are to surround the king, each man with his weapon in his hand. Anyone who penetrates the ranks is to be killed. Stay with the king whenever he leaves or enters. The captains over the hundreds did exactly as Jehoiada the Kohen ordered. Each took his man concerning those coming on duty on Shabbat and those going off duty on Shabbat, and came to Jehoiada the Kohen. The Kohen issued to the captains of hundreds and spears and shields that had been King David's and were kept in the house of Adonai. The guards then took positions, each man with his weapon in his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, alongside the altar, alongside the exterior of the house, and along the king, and around the king. Then he brought out the king's son, crowned him, gave him a copy of the testament, and thus made him king. They anointed him, clapped their hands, and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the shouting of the guard and the people, she entered the house of Adonai where the people were, looked and saw the king standing there on the platform. In keeping with the rule, with the leaders and trumpeters next to the king, all the people of the land were celebrating and blowing the trumpets. At this, Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason! Treason!" Jehoiada the Kohen ordered the captains of hundreds, the army officers, escort her out past the ranks of guards, but anyone who follows her, kill with the sword. For the Kohen had said, she must not be put to death in the house of Adonai. So they took her by force and led her through the horses' entry of the royal palace, and there she was put to death. Jehoiada made a covenant between Adonai and the king of the people, and that they would be Adonai's people, and a covenant between the king and the people. Then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and broke it down. They completely smashed its altars and the images, and killed Matan, priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Next, the Kohen appointed officers over the house of Adonai. He took the captains of hundreds, the Kari, the guard, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of Adonai, going by way of the gate of the guards of the royal palace. There he sat on the thrones of the kings. All the people of the land celebrated, and at the last the city was quiet. That is how they killed Athaliah with the sword at the royal palace. Joash was 7 years old when he began his reign. It was in the 7th year of Yehu that Joash began to rule, and he ruled 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Ziphah from Beersheba. Joash did what was right from Adonai's perspective throughout the lifetime of Jehoiada the Kohen, who instructed him. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and presented offerings on the high places. Joash said to the Kohen, "All the funds for sacred purposes which are brought to the house of Adonai, the half-shekel tax, the taxes on persons in a man's household, and all the offerings anyone voluntarily brings to the house of Adonai, the Kohen are to receive from whoever personally makes contributions to them, and they are to use these funds to repair the damaged places of the house, wherever damage is found." But 23 years into the reign of King Joash, the Kohanim had still not repaired the damaged places in the house. So King Joash summoned Yehoiada the Kohen and other Kohanim and said to them, "Why aren't you repairing the damaged places in the house? Therefore you are no longer to take money from those who contribute it personally to you. You must hand it over to be used in repairing the damage in the house." The Kohanim agreed not to receive money from the people, and they would no longer be responsible for repairing the damages to the house. Then Yehoiada the Kohen took a chest, drilled a hole in its lid, and set it up by the altar on the right as one enters the house of Adonai. And the Kohanim in charge of the entry put all the money into it. Put in it all the money brought into the house of Adonai. When they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the king's secretary and the Kohen Agadol would come up, count the money in front of the house of Adonai, and put it in the bags. When they would give the weighted out money to those supervising the work of the house of Adonai, who would use it to pay the carpenters and construction workers doing the work in the house of Adonai, on masons, stone workers, timber, worked stone, and everything else needed for repairing the damaged places in the house of Adonai. But none of the money was brought into the house of Adonai was used to make silver cups, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, and other articles of gold or silver for the house of Adonai, because they gave money to those doing the work, thus restricting its use to repairing the damage of the house of Adonai. Moreover, they did not require an accounting from the supervisors given the money to pay the workers, but they dealt honestly. Money from guilt offerings and sin offerings, however, was not brought into the house of Adonai. It went to the Kohanim. Hazael, king of Aram, went up and fought against Gath, and after capturing Hazael, made his decision to attack Jerusalem. Joash, king of Yehuda, took all the consecrated articles that Jehoshaphat, Joram, and Ahaziah, his ancestors, kings of Yehuda, had dedicated, as well as his own consecrated articles and all the gold found in the treasuries of the house of Adonai and of the royal palace, and set them to Hazael, king of Aram, who then withdrew from Jerusalem. Other activities of Joash and all his accomplishments are recorded in the annals of the kings of Yehuda. Then his servants got together, formed a conspiracy, and murdered Joash at Beth Millo on the way down to Selah. His servants Yozachar, son of Shemat, and Jozabad, son of Shomer, struck him so that he died. They buried him with his ancestors in the city of David, and Amaziah, his son, took his place as king. It was in the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Yehuda, that Joahaz, the son of Jehu, began his reign over Israel in Shamron. He ruled for 17 years. He did what was evil from Adonai's perspective. He followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, and he never ceased committing those sins. Adonai's anger burned against Israel, and he kept handing them over to Hazael, king of Aram, and Benhadad, son of Hazael. But Joachaz pleaded to Adonai, and Adonai listened to him, because he saw the oppression the king of Aram was inflicting on Israel. So Adonai gave Israel a savior who freed them from the grip of Aram, so that the people of Israel could live in their tents as they did before. Despite that, instead of turning from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, who made Israel sin, they continued to live in this sinful way. Moreover, the Asherah continued to stand in Shamron. The king of Aram destroyed Yochaz's army, making them like chaff when grain is threshed, except for 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. Other activities of Yochaz, all his accomplishments and his power, are recorded in the annals kings of Israel. Yochaz slept with his ancestors, and they buried him in Shamron. Then Joash his son took his place as king. It was in the 37th year of Joash king of Yehudah that Joash the son of Jochaz began his rule over Israel in Shamron. He ruled 16 years. He did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, and did not turn from all the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nevat, who made Israel sin. On the contrary, he lived in this sinful way. Other activities of Joash, all his accomplishments and his power in fighting Amaziah, king of Yehudah, are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Joash slept with his ancestors, and Jeroboam occupied his throne. Joash was buried in Shamron with the kings of Israel. Elisha was now ill with a disease from which he would eventually die. Joash, the king of Israel, came down to visit him and wept over him. He said, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." Elisha said to him, "Bring a bow and an arrow." He brought a bow and arrow. He said to the king of Israel, "Put your hand in the bow and put his hand on it." Then Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands and said, "Open the east window." He opened it. Elisha said, "Shoot," and he shot. He said, "Adonai's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory against Aram. You will defeat Aram completely at Aphek." He said, "Take the arrows," and he took them. He told the king of Israel, "Strike the ground." He struck 3 times, then stopped. The man of God became angry with him and said, "You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram completely. As it is, you will defeat Aram only 3 times." Elisha died, and they placed him in a burial cave. Now the raiding parties of Moab used to make yearly incursions into the land at the start of the year. Once it happened that just as they were burying a man, they spotted a raiding party. So they threw the man's body onto Elisha's burial cave. At the moment the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. Hazael, king of Aram, oppressed Israel throughout the lifetime of Jochaz. But Adonai was gracious, took pity on them, and looked on them with favor, because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. He was not willing to destroy them, and to this day he has not banished them from his presence. Hazael, king of Aram, died, and Benhadad, his son, took his place as king. Then Joash, the son of Jochaz, captured from Benhadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had captured in war from Jochaz, his father. 3 times Joash defeated him, thus recovering the cities of Israel.